Welcome along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David,
And my name is Matt.
and we are the Taylor Bros.
Indeed, we are. This week, as with other weeks.
Every week we are the Taylor Bros, and we're talking about making it count. And just the idea we came across was something that I'd read recently, and this is it. If you know something and don't do it, you don't know it. That was sort of the idea, the thing is like if you know something but don't do it, you don't actually know it. So
Yeah.
what was your first impressions of that, Matt?
Yeah, well, again, first impressions, it's difficult to have true first impressions, but first impressions in terms of recording, uh, it kind of seems like, huh? But it rings a bell, and it's something we've shared before, but it's this idea that like common sense isn't common practice, or common knowledge isn't common practice.
Hmm.
And I think there's a difference between ultimately like knowing something up here intellectually and being able to say the axiom or whatever,
Mhm.
and actually it's part of my life. I live it. So
Yeah,
that's a different level of knowledge, I think.
yes. And so the idea that I think I'm not fairly sure I got it from the book about Trust and Inspire by Stephen Covey. And he talks about it in the context of leadership, really, and how they
Mm,
talk to a lot of leaders and say, how are you at these various competencies, at trusting your employees, as being inspiring, these sorts of things.
yeah,
And then they talk to the people that work for them,
yeah.
and there's just this huge disparity. And he
Mm,
basically goes, the leaders, they're not bad people. They have good intentions. Their intent is good, but
yes.
actually the reality of their behavior is different. And so this normal thing of we judge ourselves by our intention and other people by their behavior. And so he sort of summarizes, as far as I can remember, this idea that hey, you might think you know something, you might even be doing it, but if you're not doing it, you don't actually know it. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's something that comes from doing it that means there's a deeper knowledge. So, what do you think about that? Have you had that experience where you thought you knew something, you started to do it, and now you're like, oh, I didn't, but now I really do know it?
Okay, two thoughts coming to mind there. I suppose from the leadership point of view, I've been in a few positions where I've done some leading. I've never done anything like a 360 review or anything, never been in a formal situation where that's happened. So I suppose I have no idea about what some of the things I would say, yeah, like this is how I show up. And then people that are around me would go, okay, that's actually how he shows up. So they're probably almost, well, I know this because people that have done them say you think you don't have any blind spots, but then you do one of these and it's quite horrifying. You make sure you're sat down when you read the results. So I know that I'll have those blind spots. From the way that you framed that last one though, so like you think you know it, and then when you start practicing it, you suddenly realize, oh, I don't know this nearly as well as I thought. It's the idea of the J curve,
Mhm,
isn't it? So the shape of a J, I need to draw it correctly for the camera. So it's like it goes that way,
mhm.
right? So you start there and you start and then you initially get worse. And for a while you're getting worse before it gets better and then you take off sort of thing. And that's recently, for example, I started up again doing some pottery this year. That's been really fun. I hadn't done it in about 5 years before doing it again. And initially it was just painful again. I was like, I conceptually know what I should be doing with my hands, but I'd lost that knowledge. I was able to fairly quickly gain it back again, but also I noticed I'd got into bad habits. So the instructor had to come and be like, "Well, actually, this is how you need it to be," and like talked through not just like the theory, but like, and this is because that's what's happening. This is where your hands need to be. You need to be pushing in. It wants to come, that sort of thing. And it was like, oh yeah, now I get it. And then you're feeling it, and so that's been a really helpful way of reminding me recently, like from a very hands-on perspective, this is what this feels like now I would say, and of course, there's still many times when I turn up and it just everything flops. But I'm getting out of that sort of bottom of the J. I'm getting back into oh, I know this. Not like it almost, we talk about like muscle memory. It's that deep in. It's like, oh, you feel it with your hands, you feel it with your muscles, sort of thing.
Mm,
That's the knowledge we're talking about.
yeah. There was a a coach that I read his book. I'm trying to remember his name, but the book was called Relentless, and he was a bit like that. He'd worked with some of the best sports athletes in the US, and he was quite extreme in a lot of ways, like high intensity, focus, be relentless in how you approach everything. And his sort of organization grew and grew until he had other coaches who would work for him, who would be training the athletes and the sportsmen and women. And one of the things he was saying is, well, if you're going to put them on this diet, you have to do the diet. You have to know
Yeah.
what it's like. And one aspect of one of these diets was basically a total sugar fast for 10 days. And he said, when you do that, what happens is day 2, you will have a migraine. Your body's going to shut down because you are addicted. You have so much sugar. Like, to do a total sugar fast is really intense. And it's like these coaches are like breaking down. It's like this awful experience, but it helps them be more now empathetic because they have
Yes.
this deeper lived experience for their athletes. And we all sort of joke, but you don't want an oversized coach. You want the coach that kind of, they might not do it now, but they at least understand what it's like to do the hard thing.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was probably what it's like, is it's this deeper knowledge that happens when you experience something.
Absolutely. Well, the Tim Elmore's picture for it is the skinny chef, isn't it? It's kind of like, oh, you don't want to go and eat at the restaurant of the chef that's wasting away, because you go, wow, if you're wasting away, you clearly aren't eating your own food. So why would I want to eat your food, sort of thing.
Yeah, I had a friend who always used to joke about that. He never trusts a skinny chef.
Yeah, exactly. I think a phrase I want to bring in here, because we're talking about knowledge. If you know something and don't do it, you don't know it. It kind of reminds me of the way that in the Bible it used to translate. It was translated before, like right at the beginning, like Adam knew his wife Eve, and people have often been like, oh, like that's just like a little bit prudish. They don't want to say the word, but what you learn after thinking about it a little bit more and coming back and reflecting on it, and you see is that Hebrew word, I think it's yada, it it belies something. It belies that knowing isn't what we think of as knowing, as in sort of post enlightenment. It's all about what's going on up here. I know that, and or like Descartes, I think, therefore I am, sort of thing. It's very much a more embodied and almost relational thing. And maybe we're going to tie it here with the relationship in a bit, the leadership and what you're doing in such a way. But that coming together and knowing is such a powerful concept of there's a coming together, there's a unity, and that's what's going on there. And I think that can be the case where, for example, a skill that you're learning, like you can, a scientist might be able to perfectly describe the way that the air moves around a football that's being kicked, such that that's why it bends in a certain way. That's one way of knowing what's going on. But the football player who's practiced taking those has another way of knowing what's going on.
And what I think you're touching on is this idea that, what do we believe about the word knowledge? What is knowledge? And much of how we're set up is this idea that knowledge is in their head. I get taught knowledge by the teacher, the book, the expert. I say the knowledge back. That means I know it.
Yeah.
But actually, there's other types of knowledge, as you talked about, and it's this, again, it's a bit of a sporting example, but they say many times the best athletes, the best sports people in the world make terrible coaches because they don't know why they're so good. They'll just be like, do this amazing thing that I used to be able to do without really thinking about it. And all the athletes that now work for this coach who used to be an amazing player is like, we can't do that. Like, how do we do that? And he's like, well, just do it. Like, I was able to just do it. And it's like, well, he can't communicate even how he knew how to do that in his body and with his mind. But there was a different sort of knowledge. It was maybe it's a heart knowledge or an implicit in his body. And so people talk about, well, how do you even make decisions? Do you make it with your head, with your heart, with your gut? And there's these different types of knowledge based off of experience, of a combination of how of stories you've heard. It's like, oh, well, we know this story in my culture, so that means I know how to respond in this situation. And so I think that's the idea, that we're trying to drag people into this awareness. It's like head knowledge isn't bad, it's really useful oftentimes, but it's not the only knowledge. And actually, it can be, and let's have a broader view of that, because if you think you know something in your head, but you're not living it, there is a bit of a discontinuity there. There's a lack of almost integrity, is what we might say.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lack of integrity, and not necessarily in a moral sense, but in a you've got a disconnect between what you think and what you actually do. I suppose it reminds me of we've maybe spoken about this before. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but kind of the danger of an insight or the danger of an epiphany is another way of thinking about it. It's like we love it. We love getting an epiphany. Oh, now I understand. I've never seen it like that before. And if you don't do anything with the epiphany, it's no point. You might as well not have had the epiphany. You might have not have had the insight. And it's kind of the thing of the man in the arena whole thing. Like everybody loves to know it and be the armchair critic. And I like, well, if I was in that situation, I would know what to do. Well, get in the situation then and do it. Show that you know with being involved and being it. So I suppose that maybe to take this to the next step in the conversation, like what are some things that perhaps we know, but actually now we realize we don't know as well as we thought we did. Like,
Well, you, yeah, this is to me quite obvious in a lot of areas. Maybe not me specifically, but us generally. I ran a well-being training course for a while. And some of the stuff around well-being, this foundational points, is moving more, eating effectively, and sleeping soundly. Now,
yes,
everyone knows that moving and exercise is important. The eating thing, everybody knows we should be eating more fruit and veg, like, the 5 a day. Like, we can track that over time, and more people know that than ever knew it before, but less people do it now, right?
yeah,
So and sleeping soundly. And so there's this idea that, well, you might be able to articulate it, you know it in your head, but you're not doing it. And I think that's where we see the disconnect. That's why I would say it's almost like an integrity thing, or like that. I mean, you know it in your head, but you don't know it. And you'd want to go see the nutritionist who has done this for 15 years, because there's something, oh,
yes,
you know what the challenges are like. Yeah, you know how difficult this is. Or hey, when you go to the shops, you just want to buy all the other things. And when you're at home and you're tired on a Friday night, that's you get it. There's a deeper thing than just like, oh, I know I should eat more like fruit and veg. Well, do you? Do you really? Like, you don't really believe it, because you might do something about it then. And I don't
yeah,
want to dismiss the point that actually, on the journey to doing something, there has to be some knowledge. I think that is helpful. There are people that do things that are really good and they have no idea why. They don't have the knowledge, but they're doing it anyway. And that's also fine. But I think there's a knowledge on the journey there. But I think, like you've talked about here, many of us get stuck in the knowledge bit. Well, we know this. Cool.
yeah. Because I think what we fall into the fallacy of, maybe I'm just generalizing here and it's completely off base, but partly I think it ties to this idea that kind of at the moment reading through the 7 habits of highly effective people, and habit number 2 is such a powerful one. Begin with the end in mind, because basically it goes, be faced with your mortality. There will come an end, and how do you want that to be? How do you want people to remember you when you have passed? What do you want the shape of your life to have been at that point? Okay, great. Now let's that inform. But I think so often we're so good at just kind of conveniently forgetting that in the day-to-day run-of-the-mill life, yeah, ultimately there will come a point where that's it, time's up. And in a sense, we fool ourselves into thinking what we have now will just always continue to be, because a day doesn't look that different from yesterday. To this week doesn't look that different from last week. So we, because of that, that then allows us to just procrastinate on the things. Oh, yeah, I know I should eat healthy. I'll get round to that next time. I've got a big milestone. Oh, I know I should exercise more. New Year's only 8 months away. I'll do, like we postpone, we procrastinate, and that we've talked about that before, like with that brilliant TED talk, the inside the mind of a master procrastinator. And he says the most insidious things we procrastinate on don't have a deadline until your final deadline, which is your death day, if you hadn't got that. Because, if you've got an exam, if you've got a job interview, if you've got, a project, that has a deadline built in, and eventually the panic monster will set in and go, hang on, you've got to stop procrastinating and do some work on this, put something into this. But when it comes to all of these other things that nobody is, there's no person that's going to come along and go, how's, unless you submit to it personally, how's your diet, how's your exercise, how's your relationships? So again, with this, like we know enough that just to be dangerous, to almost convince ourselves, almost inoculate ourselves against the, okay, now I need to take the action, because we kind of go, I know enough, so great. When I get round to it, I'll do great at it, but I'll just not today, maybe tomorrow, or maybe next week.
And this is where it touches on the challenge of like knowing how to create those habits, and
Yes.
also recognizing those things. So, if you went and typed in types of knowledge into Google or any of your favorite search engines, you're going to get loads of systems ideas about different things, but one of them or two of them are explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge. And I think we touched on that. Like, the explicit knowledge is things I know that I can tell you, but the implicit knowledge is things I kind of know, but I don't really think about. And so the example is, if I was onboarding you at a business, the explicit knowledge is everything I tell you. The implicit knowledge is all the stuff about the organization that I don't really see, but is actually really important.
Yes.
And so it's just like, oh, we implicitly knew this because we've been here for 10 years.
Yeah.
We don't even notice it enough to be able to communicate that.
Yeah. It's like this is how this organization really runs. This is who you talk to if you need that doing. This is the way you get around that barrier that nobody tells the person.
Yeah, because it's not written down. It's not really this like really understood knowledge that can be communicated clearly, because people don't really figure it out. And so, I think that idea that we were talking about about the basketball player who was really great, he has some explicit knowledge, about the tactical side of the game, the stuff he's learned, but there are some skills or abilities that he had that made him one of the best in the world, that when he's a coach, he doesn't know how to communicate that was just an implicit part of his experience, that, oh, I can do this. I've been doing this since I was, 8 or 9 or however long, and I know how to do this because I've done this for hundreds and thousands of hours.
Yeah.
You just do it. No, we can't just do that. Well, I don't know how to teach that. and so those are just interesting things. So I suppose maybe if you know something and don't do it, then you don't know it, is a bit binary, I think. But I think it's a helpful challenge to us, where many times we say we know something, but we don't. And we've settled for the staging post of, oh, I know I should do this. And I think, like, again, coming back to the wellbeing course I ran and some of the stuff I'm writing around that, sleep, I think, is the number one. Oh, I think I read recently that before the electric light bulb was invented, people on average slept 10 hours a night. And there's not many people over the age of 5 that are sleeping 10 hours a day or 10 hours a night.
Yeah.
And everybody says, I should be sleeping more. I'm tired. Why are you tired? Well, I stayed up late, watched the film, or I went out, or I just don't sleep enough, or I was on my phone, or it was too hot, or it was too cold. It's all these reasons. It's like most of us know we should be sleeping more, but we don't prioritize that. And so we don't really know that we should be sleeping more until we actually do it, and we realize, oh, when I do get 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep a night consistently, like, this is so much better. I get less migraines, I'm more energetic, I eat less because I'm tired less, and all of these other sort of knock-on effects. And you talk to many personal trainers and they're like, yeah, the best training thing you can do is make sure you get enough sleep, because that's when the repair happens for your body.
Yeah.
Psychologists talk about that. Your brain recovers and processes all the information from the day. So all of these things. So if we really knew how good it was for us, we would prioritize it, but we don't. We've ultimately just go, meh. And so we don't really know that we need more sleep, because we're happy with just sort of surviving, just getting by.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because, and again, to bring in the 7 habits, the first habit is be proactive. So it's kind of like, take responsibility for your life in a sense. Yes, everybody's had stuff happen to them, but it's what we then choose. The second one, and I think this is where maybe this plays in. It's like, if you can envisage, this is how I want my life to have finished and shape when I look back at it on the end. That then allows you to make some key decisions like, oh, well, what is it that's really important? And then basically what we're saying now, this is interesting how this is twisted. I didn't think we were going to go there, but habit number 3 is put first things first. And that's not just like, what's your most pressing task for the day? It's what are the most important things in your life that you want to invest in, that you want to invest your resources, so time, money, energy, emotions, so, and once you've got those pieces in place, you recognize, great, I actually have responsibility, I have freedom to choose. So great, I'm an actor, not a reactor. Now I know how I want my life to finish, so I know the things that are going to be important to invest in. Great, now I'm going to invest time in those things. So that is the putting into place, the knowing. So like, if you just finish it, great, I've got a wonderful vision for how I want my life to be, I've written down my obituary and my eulogy, and then you don't live your life any different, have you actually made a difference? Until you start going, okay, what are the key relationships? What are the key skills? What are the big achievements that I'm moving towards today that are going to change my life? So, for example, something that has just been helpful for me recently. We've talked a lot about this over the year and a half of doing podcasting, journaling. But sometimes I go through a bit of a dry patch where I'm kind of like, I'll just do it in the morning. I'll do it tomorrow. A helpful reminder for me just is always coming back to almost the identity piece of like, either like one of these 2 thoughts helps. Either I am a journaler, so I'm going to journal. So that's who I am now, and so I'm going to do it. Or it's for my good, so I'm going to do it. It's good for me, even though like initially opening it up, there's something about opening up a journal and getting that pen out and starting is challenging. But as soon as you've started, often you've got over and it's in the doing it, it's in the practicing of it that I've reaped that benefit. And I go, yeah, I can believe myself now when I say it's for my good, because I have the last, I can't do the maths in my head, but 5+ years of doing it. So that's 1,500 days plus of doing it. I've got that example. That's why it's tricky starting a habit, because you kind of go, well, I know it's good for me, but only up here, you don't know it in your body yet. And that's why we need to do some of those baby steps to get ourselves to that place where we see a little reward, and then we start believing it.
Definitely. So I think we just sort of wrap up there, and I'll say the quote again, but if you know something and don't do it, you don't know it. What do you think about that? Have we been a bit too harsh? Is that too harsh a quote? Or do you think actually there's another way of looking at this that we haven't really discussed? I would love to, or we would love to hear what you have to say about that. What do you think of that quote? But that is
Absolutely.
our episode today. We are the Make It Count podcast, and we hope you are making it count today.